and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who would like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you. Hi, I'm Helen Leathers, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Tom Dillon. Good morning, Tom. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you very much.
Good.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad you asked. I thought you weren't going to then.
Almost forgot.
Tom, today we're going to be doing one of our challenges in coaching. So my question to you today, Tom, is it necessary to contract with our clients?
Yes, is the answer.
Excellent.
Good. Well, let's talk about it. Let's explore it some more.
Let's do that.
So I think it's a really interesting aspect of coaching to talk about because I act as a supervisor to many coaches, and I think one of the biggest problems that people face and what they bring to supervision really could have been headed off by doing some really good contracting. So most of the things that come into the supervision room are around things they haven't bothered to contract with the client around.
Okay. Now, I think let's get clear what we mean by contracting, because I think sometimes you can, imagine this great big lengthy, and I have seen great big lengthy contracts with technical language. I don't use a contract like that. I use a very simple, stripped back contract. What about you?
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I don't believe in bamboozling people, so we want a very easy contract that they can read and understand. But I think it's important to include some factors. So if we start with the end in mind, what we want is for the coachee to leave the coaching relationship happy, that some really good coaching has happened, they've worked towards their desired outcome. They might not have it by then, but hopefully they will have done some good work, and they are happy with the way that the relationship has run. And there aren't any reasons for them to complain. So I think that's a really important thing around contracting, is to protect yourself, but also to allow the coaching client, the coachee, to understand what coaching is. And so when they come to the coaching, just to be ready for it and to have a really good understanding of what's actually going to happen in the coaching room.
And we don't necessarily need to put all of that in writing. Some of this contract is going to be done verbally in our discussions prior to starting the coaching.
Yes, so both you and I have a conversation with our coachees before we start the coaching. So you have a discovery call, I have a chemistry call, but it's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
So we're talking to the coachee about what they want from coaching, and we're explaining how our coaching works and what the expectations we have, from them around the coaching, and also what they can expect from us. And that conversation will happen in that chemistry call. It might happen again, or some of it might happen at the beginning of the first coaching session. And we might touch on it again later on in the coaching. But it's really important to have that conversation at the beginning. Now, what we choose to confirm in writing, that's going to be an individual choice. And like you say, some people will have a very extensive contract that covers every eventuality. But for the most part, I think it's just useful to have something in writing so that they understand it is a formal relationship and a formal agreement.
I think, as with most formal arrangements, not having a contract isn't a problem until it becomes a problem, and then you wish you had a contract, right?
Yeah, so that it is starting with the end in mind, knowing that if something goes wrong, you have covered those bases, and you can explain yourself to the coachee. You can refer back to the contract. And so I've never had to refer back to the contract.
No, me neither.
Coaching relationships tend to go well. So in 15 years, I've never had to go, hang on a minute, let's have a look at the contract, see what it says. But it's there just in case. So I think it is really important just to have a safeguard. And so not only that, but also to introduce coaching to the coachee and to set out, as I say, your expectations of them, what they can expect from you, and just how the coaching is going to run.
So you've mentioned that the contract defines coaching for the coachee and explains what it is so that they have an understanding of what to expect from you and what's expected from them. What else do we need to think about when we think about contracting?
So I think contracting is really helpful in establishing some structure. So if we're thinking about how long the coaching relationship is going to be, that might well be something that you put into your contract. our method of coaching, our approach to coaching, how we show up as a coach. I think it's really important for the coachee to understand that, because we have different ways of coaching. And if we explain our coaching in a way that is not authentic, it's not what we're actually going to do in the coaching room, then I think that could easily lead to some disagreement. So I'm a very emergent coach, and I explain that in my contracting in the chemistry session. So I explain what I tend to do in the coaching room, and that I'm not particularly process driven. So if they're looking for a coach that is going to push them through a process and come out the other end having achieved exactly what they wanted to achieve at the beginning, then I'm probably not the right coach for them. And I think it's important for me to explain that so that they have an understanding. And if there's another coach around that does what they want them to do, and it's perhaps more directive, but definitely more planful, then they will choose them. And that's fine. I want to work with people who appreciate my style of coaching and want to work with me. So I think that's another important aspect, is just setting out what your coaching is going to be like. Obviously, there are some practical elements. So whether your coaching is going to be online or in person, who will arrange those meetings, whether you're going to email them with the meeting date. So there are different ways that we could be doing coaching, which all can be covered within the contract. And I think that's something that's obviously changed during lockdown, that I now do a bit of a mix. So some of my coaching is online and some is face-to-face, and that might be with the same client. We have some meetings that are face-to-face and some online, but we need to set the scene for that so that they understand that's the case.
And of course, there's the financial aspect of the agreement.
Yeah, which is, again, very important, because you don't want to end up working for nothing. So as long as they understand what the cost is, how it's all going to work, when they should pay you. I don't know, when do you normally get paid?
Before a session.
Yeah, and I'm the same. So thinking about that, I think some people might be a little bit twitchy. Well, they haven't seen me coach yet. How can I charge them for not? But I think it's important to set that expectation that you will be paid prior to the coaching taking place.
Yeah, I've only once had someone say that they really weren't comfortable with that, and it was someone that had never met me, and I find that really interesting. Most of my clients have met me in some capacity through business networking, for example, and this lady came out of nowhere. I'm not quite sure. I think she found me perhaps online, and there wasn't an established relationship there, and it was just that one person that said they didn't want to pay up front, and it does make me wonder if that relationship would have worked, actually.
Yeah, and I don't always know my coachees before they come, but quite often they will come through a recommendation from someone else who has experienced me coaching, so they know that it worked for them. So this week I've had 2 referrals from people that I know that have been coached by me, and that's lovely, because then they have some trust in you as a coach before it even starts. So I think, again, then they would be more confident about paying you up front. And it might only just be for the first session. I know that you do longer programs, and sometimes you offer a discount, or you will offer an extra session if they pay for the whole thing up front.
Yeah, if that's something that they want to do.
So again, that's really important in part of the contracting, that you tell people what's going to happen and how all of that is going to work. I think contracting also models the coaching process. So we're going to be open and transparent in our contracting, and we're going to have a commitment to the success of the coaching, which obviously is going to be emulated as we start to coach. So I think that, again, is really important.
Excellent. So what are the other benefits that contracting might offer?
I think it minimises confusion and misunderstanding, and in turn any frustration. So if you have someone that really hasn't understood what coaching is, and they're perhaps expecting you to mentor them. We see this a lot in the NHS, where there's that odd blurring of the lines between coaching and mentoring, and some people are offered mentoring but they're getting coaching, and some people are offered coaching and they're getting mentoring, and I think that leads to confusion. So unless you've contracted for that, and I think that's really important for internal coachees that are being asked to coach in a particular way, for them to have a formal contract that says this is what's going to happen in that space. Because I think it can be really frustrating then if someone comes along and isn't getting what they thought they were going to get. So I think that's a big advantage of doing some contracting. And I'd say that's probably a good thing to think about. We obviously act as independent coaches. So quite often we are just dealing one-to-one with our clients, but we will also go into organisations and coach within an organisation. So we will contract with the organisation and the individual coachee. But if you're working within an organisation like the NHS or within a particular trust, they will have, hopefully, they will have some form of formal contract that everyone signs up to. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I think it should be. So I think every time that you coach someone within an organisation, a contract should be reviewed and agreed to before it starts. And say, I don't think that's always the case.
If it is, our listeners can always let us know.
Yes.
We'd love to hear more about that.
So it avoids that frustration that someone might not be getting what they expect. It increases the buy-in from the coachees so that they have that understanding of what is expected. It increases the chances of the coaching process going more smoothly because much of the detail has been agreed on in advance. So in terms of appointments, cancellations, lateness, those sorts of things, I think that's a really interesting one actually, because I don't particularly mind if people are late. If they turn up late, that life happens and gets in the way, and sometimes they're 10 minutes late. But I don't extend the coaching hour or hour and a half beyond the time at which it was due to end. So they're late, which is fine. I'm not going to say, well, hang on a minute, you're late, but they don't get extra time on the end. And that's just something that I contract for ahead of time.
And practically, if you've put appointments into your diary, you can't extend that time because you will be moving to do a training session or see another coachee.
But if we don't contract for it, someone might say, well, okay, I was late, but I still want my hour.
Yes.
So important to get that agreed ahead of time, I think.
Yeah. One of the things that I add in as well, because you mentioned that I run programs, and I'll do 12 sessions and we meet fortnightly. So that's a 6-month program. What I tend to say is that I'm flexible. Life happens, and sometimes we might need to move to the 3rd week instead of the 2nd week or something like that. So one of the things I put in my contract is that those 12 sessions need to be completed within an 8-month period. Right. Yeah. And that's just so that we don't get that, can I just postpone? Can I postpone indefinitely? And I've just found no one told me to do that. I just felt it makes sense to do that. So that was something that I put in, and something that if someone's considering doing a programme, they might want to add into their contracting.
Yeah, so what would happen if it did drift and you went beyond the 8 months?
It never has.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so I perhaps need to think about that.
Contracting.
yes. And genuinely it never has. It has sometimes been extended where someone has had a life event in the middle of our programme, whether that is a wedding and then honeymoon and that kind of thing. So there's been a slight extension, but it's never gone beyond that 8-month period. So,
and I think another element of that is what happens if someone does cancel a session at short notice. So I have within my contract that people should give me 48 hours notice. And if they don't give me 48 hours notice, then I reserve the right to charge them for that session. They don't get the session. Again, that's my contract, but I'm quite flexible with that. So if there has been an emergency, then I'm going to defer it. I'm going to postpone it and pick it up later.
I'm absolutely the same.
Yeah.
In fact, I have had someone turn up for a session online who had had a bad night's sleep, and I chose to say, do you know what would be much better for you today than an hour with me would be an hour to sleep. And I suggested that they just went and slept for an hour, and I deferred the session. And because I can, because it's my business, and I just felt that was a better use of their time.
Yeah, and I think that's probably an advantage of working online for much of your work, that you can just do something else, can't you? If someone doesn't turn up, you're at your desk and you can just get on with some work. Whereas if you'd made a trip to go and see someone and they just hadn't turned up, or they cancelled on your way there, then it's a bit of a wasted journey. So you might be more inclined to charge. I tend to charge organisations. So if the organisation is paying and one of their employees doesn't turn up for some coaching and they haven't let me know in advance, then I'll say, well, I will be charging. And I think most employees have that sense of responsibility to the organisation, that if they know the organisation is going to be charged, they will turn up. Whereas if you just go, oh, it doesn't matter, we'll just shift it, and they think, oh, well, that's fine, then they'll keep doing it.
And whilst we have that flexibility, I think we're both quite understanding of people's life situations and things that crop up. What the contract allows us to do is, if that becomes a repeated pattern, we can call on that contract to say, this has become an issue and I will now be charging you.
Yes. Good. So one of the other important things I think with contracting is setting the scene in terms of the boundaries around coaching. So as I said before, some people will say, well, we'll do some coaching, but they really mean mentoring. And both you and I have that view that we're not mentoring, we're not advising in a coaching session, we're coaching. So we're allowing them to come up with their own answers. So we might want to make that clear within the coaching contracting, that's what we'll be doing. Also in terms of if it strays towards therapy, if the work gets a little bit deeper and it's beyond our competency, our skill set, what happens then? And I think, again, that's really important, just to be able to say to someone, okay, this is coaching, it's not therapy. If I feel that it's straying that way, then we might pause the coaching and we'll talk about what other support you have available to you and how you might access that support.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
And that leads then into confidentiality.
Yes.
And because most coaching is going to be confidential. I've not really come across a scenario where someone expects it not to be.
No.
I think some organisations might, if it's performance coaching within an organisation, the manager might want you to share with them. But I would tend to refuse those contracts. If someone said to me, okay, well, yes, you can coach them and we'll pay you, but we want you to report back what's happening, then I'm not going to agree to that. So that's important, again, with the organisation to contract around what you will and won't do.
And I think we're both of the same opinion there, that if the client is concerned that what they're saying is going to go back to a manager, they're not going to have that sense of openness and they're not going to trust us 100%. So much of the coaching won't be beneficial.
Yeah, so I think that is one of the most important things of the contracting, is that assurance of confidentiality, and that it's not going to go anywhere else.
And actually, I think that's one element that it's probably the only element that I reiterate. I talk about, obviously, in the initial call, I have it in my contract, and then I will occasionally reiterate verbally further down the line. Sometimes it's just a point where a client is hesitant, and they might say, I'm not sure if I should bring this to coaching. And in that moment, I might just reiterate, you know that you can tell me anything you like, there's no judgment, and it's entirely confidential. And sometimes that little reminder just allows them to go, okay, yes, I can tell you.
Whilst at the same time, it's important to remember there may be exceptions to your assurance of confidentiality. So my parameters around that, everything is confidential unless they're doing something illegal. Now, there are degrees of illegality, but if we have to have that in there, I think that if they're doing something illegal, we might have to report it to someone.
Yeah.
Also, if there's serious risk of harm to themselves or someone else, then again, I want that in the contract, that I reserve the right to take that somewhere else. I've never had to do it, but I want to have that in there. Now, I think within organisations, certainly doctors, they might have professional standards that the GMC apply, and they might want to say, look, if you are not upholding those professional standards, then I might have to report that.
Yes.
Now, again, that's for them to decide with their coachee what's appropriate, but I think it is something to think about ahead of time. So you don't want to be in a situation where someone's told you they're doing something that totally goes against professional standards and you really feel strongly that you want to do something about it, but you've assured them of confidentiality. So how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a really important point. That has to be in the contract, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's a simple thing, but one of the things that I will say to people is, obviously we're working together, like I say, for the most part for 12 sessions. I'll always let them know in my verbal contracting that towards the end of that programme, we can have a conversation about extending that coaching further. And it sounds it sounds less important than some of the other topics that we have talked about, but I have in the early days got towards the end of the 12-session program and a client has said, oh my goodness, I'm really benefiting from this. It's such a shame it's going to end. And I thought, well, who said it had to end? But of course I hadn't told them that it could be extended. So I do let them know that towards the end of the program we will discuss if that's something that they want to do, that we can extend the coaching.
Good. I think a couple of other things before we finish. I think that the roles and responsibilities of both the coach and the coachee ought to be established at the beginning. So if, like I say, if you're taking responsibility for organising appointments, then that's set in stone. But also if you are going to be asking the coachee to do homework in between.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, so you will want to contract around that and say, well, it's important that you do the homework. And now you're probably not going to be holding them to account if they don't do it, but I think it's just setting the scene, isn't it, and saying, okay, if we are working together, I will set homework, and there is going to be that expectation that you do the homework before you come to the next session.
Yeah, I also let them know that I call it home play.
Home play.
Yeah,
good.
So it's not too much work.
I don't really do homework, but
Did the dog eat it?
Yeah. So also perhaps how the progress within the coaching will be monitored sounds a bit heavy, but how you'll review the progress to make sure that they're on track with what they originally said they wanted as a desired outcome. So you might, if you've got an 8-session program, you might say, okay, we'll check in after 2 sessions and then after 4 sessions, and we'll just make sure that we are doing what we said we would do in the coaching. And that might change, but at least if we recontract around that and go, okay, we've got 4 sessions left, but we've now changed the focus of the coaching and we're going to focus on this for the next 4 sessions, then I think, again, that can be really helpful.
Yeah. And following on from that, and I think perhaps this is more important when we're doing practice coaching as students, where perhaps we're not charging, if you would like to ask at the end for your client to give you a testimonial, that could be mentioned right at the start. And whilst it might not be set in stone because they might not feel able to give a testimonial, or they might want to make it anonymous, I think it's worth mentioning in the contracting.
Yeah. Again, it's just setting those expectations, isn't it?
Yes.
It's saying this is how this is going to work. You're going to have some free coaching, but actually it would really help me if you could give me a testimonial. How does that sound if you give me a testimonial at the end?
Yeah.
Good. One thing we haven't mentioned is record keeping.
We haven't, have we?
And note-taking and how you're going to keep records. And obviously there are certain rules in this country around GDPR, and if you're holding client data, that you keep it secure. Other jurisdictions will have other rules, but I think it's important, if you are coaching, to be aware of what the regulations are around personal information that's held on file. And obviously if you are making notes during your coaching sessions, you want to reassure the coach that how those will be handled. It might be that you just destroy them a week later, or you might keep them for 10 years. But again, just letting the coachee know what will happen to the information you hold on them.
Yeah. So mine are all anonymised.
Yes, mine too. Yeah.
And also I think one of the key elements is whether there's any personally identifiable information within those notes, and I never have anything like that. I wouldn't put their full name, date of birth and address, for example. It would be coded for what I needed to know, which, keeps everything secure.
Something else that's just come up for me is we talked about being late and that sort of behaviours around coaching. And I think maybe some exploration of not having technology on the desk, or when someone's got their phone with them and they're picking their phone up every 5 minutes whilst they're being coached. I think it's just that setting the scene that this is almost a sacred space in this conversation where you want to not be interrupted. So I think not having mobile phones or iPads or laptops open, I think, unless they're making notes, but yeah.
Yeah, and being in a private space where they won't be interrupted, so they can talk freely.
Yes. And I was talking to someone about this the other day and saying that in a previous lifetime in my work, I had to go into people's homes and have quite important conversations with them, but they'd have the TV on. And it would be, could we turn the TV off? Would that be okay? And obviously, I've never come across a coachee that has the TV on. But during lockdown, there was a lot of toing and froing of children and things like that. And that's not conducive to good coaching, really. But that was life during lockdown. But I think if we can let people know that the coaching is going to be much better if they can have a private and confidential space where they feel able just to be honest and speak openly.
Absolutely.
Good. So just in summary then, I think we started off asking whether contracting was necessary in coaching.
Yes.
And I think definitely it is. I think we've covered that. I think it's something that a lot of coachees don't do. So I think it's something for them to think about, that they should be having those really important contracting conversations with people when they do the chemistry session, but then also confirming whatever they feel is appropriate in writing to the coachee before the coaching starts. And I think that will smooth the way for the coaching process to be smooth, and also to head off any potential frustration and a complaint from the coachee.
Yeah, and it affirms your professionalism as well.
Indeed.
And it's also a requirement within the Association for Coaching as one of their core competencies that we do have contracting and we are confidential and we have an ethical practice.
Yes.
So,
but that's, again, one of those things that as a supervisor, I see lots of coachees that come along and when I ask them how they contracted around that particular issue with their coachee before they started, they go, oh yes, I didn't cover that. Yeah. Which then you think, well, are you really contracting or are you just paying lip service to it? So I think it is definitely something that coachees need to give some thought to.
I'm wondering if we should put a checklist in our show notes for people to take a look at. Yeah, just make sure they're covering off all the important points.
Excellent. Good. Thank you. I've enjoyed that.
Me too. So next time on our podcast, we will be covering another approach to coaching which we can borrow some really great techniques from, which is
Gestalt coaching.
This is your favourite, isn't it?
It is my favourite. I am very much a Gestalt coach these days. Well, I'm integrative, but Gestalt is definitely my favourite.
And I'll be honest, there are some parts of Gestalt that I totally understand and there are others that I really don't. So I'm going to be looking forward to learning something from you as well.
Very good. Look forward to that. See you next time. Thank you for all that today, Helen. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.